Welcome to Everything Co-op, bringing you information on how cooperatives can help improve your quality of life. This show is being sponsored by the National Co-op Bank, NCB. The NCB is dedicated to strengthening communities nationwide for the delivery of banking and financial services for the nation's cooperatives, their members, and other socially responsible organizations. For more information on the power of community ownership, visit ncb.coop. That's ncb.coop. Now stay tuned for your host, Vernon Oakes.
Good morning, everybody. This is Vernon Oakes. Welcome to Everything Cooperative. This morning, I'm talking to Roger Green, who's out of Brooklyn, New York, and we're in Cincinnati at the Cincinnati Union Cooperative Institute annual meeting or biannual meeting. This is the fourth time they've had this, and I've had the pleasure of being down here 3 of those 4 times. And we're going to talk today with Roger about what's going on in New York around worker co-ops and other forms of co-ops, and also what he's expecting to do down here in Cincinnati and how this is merging what he's doing in Brooklyn and what's going on in Cincinnati this weekend and around the U.S. Good morning, Roger.
Good morning. How are you?
I am great. How are you today?
Good, good.
Okay. Let's talk first about what are some of the kinds of things that you're doing in Brooklyn, and how did you get into it?
Yeah, the key thing for us in Brooklyn, I think, driven by this imperative to address the structural economic inequality that exists in certain communities and how it impacts on poor health outcomes. We've been, for the past, quite honestly, now 7 years, going on 7 years, been working on trying to save some very important healthcare institutions, our hospitals, our ambulatory care facilities. And while we're doing that, creating a parallel movement to ensure that those institutions are actually providing economic opportunities for folks that have been impacted by, again, structural economic inequality. We've been looking at how the social determinants of health, how abject poverty, relative poverty, wage insecurity, and the absence of wealth contributes to poor health outcomes throughout central Brooklyn, which is, predominated by people of color. So as we've been going through this, I guess you call it like a community of inquiry, as we're struggling to keep these institutions open, we concluded that, and this was a collective conclusion, that we needed to see if, in fact, we could redirect these anchor institutions, these healthcare institutions, redirect their supply chain back into the local economy to create living wages and broad-based profit sharing, for people living in these communities. And in doing that, we were blessed with, having some advice and counsel from folks from Mondragon as a result of leaders like Michael Peck and Carmen Huertas Noble at CUNY Law, who exposed us to the Mondragon Cooperative Federation and how its operations, its economic ecosystem has created economic security for folks in Spain, and then how that could, in fact, be applied to central Brooklyn. Yeah.
So let me make sure I get this, though, because you told us a lot here real quickly.
Yeah.
Poor food.
I apologize.
Poor housing.
Yeah.
Jobs that don't pay a living wage.
That's right.
All of these kinds of things sort of like is a funnel to poor health.
Yeah, we call those the toxic triggers of poor health. Yeah.
Toxic triggers.
Yeah. There's a number of different studies that have been released recently that clearly indicates that, your health is more likely to be informed by your zip code even than by your DNA code. If you live in certain communities that are impacted by, let's say, environmental degradation, by food insecurity, by even poor housing. Those things can contribute to you having poor health outcomes. And our coalition actually initiated a series of studies throughout central Brooklyn. We've completed 4 studies so far using what's called the participatory action research methodology that goes into communities and as opposed to studying the people in the community, actually having them work with you to participate in qualitative analysis. And in this particular case, we had a series of studies in which the people in the communities themselves said, well, I believe that my poor health outcomes are related to the fact that I can't get fresh produce in my community. We've had a more recent study in which we've had qualitative analysis where people have said, I am stressed out. And I know it's impacting on my hypertension, and I can't sleep at night because I fear that I'm going to be displaced from my house within the next 2 months. We actually have that data. So we call those the toxic triggers of poor health. And
so I always thought for black folk particularly with eating pig feet and with our diet. And now you're telling me it's where we live, how we, I guess.
Well, diet is or the.
I thought that was it.
Yeah, well, it's part of it. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, definitely. If you live in a food desert, facing food insecurity, and you're not securing access to healthy, nutritious foods, and the only thing that you get at the corner store is
or the General Dollar.
Exactly.
They're selling
processed food,
sugars.
That's right. Yeah, that impacts on your poor health. And so these are questions of equity, access, opportunity, and the absence of progressive models for sustainable community economic development.
I said, but when you say things like that, I'm all the way back to if I've got poor health. That I heard this stat that in Cleveland, if you lived in inner city Cleveland at some of these zip codes, you lived 10 years less than somebody that lived in the suburbs.
Same thing in central Brooklyn. That's right.
Same thing.
Yeah.
So it's not only poor health, quality of life, and how long one lives.
That's right.
So it may not be God calling the home. It's that poor food, poor water,
that's right.
Poor housing.
Absolutely. That's it. That's absolutely it. Yeah, no question. We have data that clearly demonstrates that the longevity and the quality of life in central Brooklyn is a lot less than, let's say, in Kips Bay, which is in the, parts of Manhattan, east side of Manhattan, no question about it. And serious data coming out of one of our key leaders, Dr. Torian Easterlin, who was a member of our coalition, who worked with the health commissioner to actually come up with a mission saying that you cannot have good health in New York City unless you embrace an aggressively anti-racist public policy. That in part, classism and racism also contributes to poor health outcomes. And that's actually in a mission statement that was composed and articulated by the health commissioner. Yeah.
Okay, so you're telling me that this whole thing, racism, this white supremacy, this whole thing in what I call systemic discrimination, if it's not one person saying, hey, I'm going to get you, but our whole system in America, America, is racist, and it creates this class system. And if you're in the bottom class, no matter what color you are, but if you're in that bottom class, then the likelihood is you're going to have poor outcomes, poor health.
Oh, yeah, no question. So recently, they've studied this crisis within the so-called Rust Belt, even West Virginia, and they now call the term despairing death.
Don't talk about my home now.
Well, yeah, you know what I'm saying. Well, that
despairing
death, yeah,
death,
yeah, and that has been something that I think many of folks in communities of color have known for some time. That when you look at again poor health outcomes, they are in part related to folks who despair based upon the alienation that they're facing, which is inextricably linked in many cases to structural economic inequality. There's no question about it. There's no accident that the epidemic of opiate-based drugs in certain communities is inextricably linked to folks who despair because they are unemployed. They don't
No
have
hope.
No hope. That's right. And so the same thing we see in data that we secured from the participatory action research related to housing displacement in central Brooklyn. People despair, they're stressed out, that in communities that they've lived in for many years, for generations, they're now being displaced. And they can't afford the housing in New York City. And so they're stressed out over that. We have healthcare workers who are moving to the Poconos in search of cheap housing, but they still have jobs in hospitals that are located in central Brooklyn. So they're traveling hours back and forth between their job and their homes, and that's stressing them out, and impacting on poor health care or the quality of care for their patients. And they're saying that in the data, in the qualitative analysis, the interviews that we've had with them, both in one-on-one and in focus groups. And so we compiled all this data and then began the process of putting together public policy prescription to address this issue, and began organizing to address the social determinants of health. Yeah.
How did you get into this? It's fascinating, particularly if you have research that can prove it.
Yeah.
What we thought all the time. Okay. So how did you get into this?
Well, for me, it started with a lived experience, my own personal experience when I was in the state legislature, and I'd served there for about 25 years. But at one point when I started, securing so-called quote-unquote seniority, I became chairperson of the Committee on Children and Families, and, just started looking at doing these thought experiments and looking at, what was happening in my constituency. One incident in particular really got to me. It was, I guess you call it an epiphany, Mm-hmm. I had been challenged by the fact, or my community had been challenged by the fact that many of our children did not secure mental health services. And I was chaired the Committee on Children and Families, and a lot of those children, because they came out of adoption, foster care, juvenile justice system, when dire need of mental health services, unfortunately. But we didn't have a children's psychiatric hospital. And so most of our children were actually sent to Staten Island. And so we began organizing, and over time I was able to enact a bill to create a new psychiatric hospital for central Brooklyn, which was located in Brownsville in East New York. $54 million complex, and I never forget the day that we did the tour and the ribbon cutting. I'm, peacocking.
Excited.
I'm peacocking around. I got my chest poked out.
Listen, I'm going to come back and find out how it felt with your chest poked out.
Okay.
Okay, after we take our break.
Okay.
Everybody out there, please don't touch that dial.
All right, no problem.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Vernon and this program is Everything Cooperative. We're coming live at you from Cincinnati, and Roger Green is our guest. Just found out he used to be in the state legislation, and he had a living experience of being the state representative and in charge of children and families. And with that, he was telling us they had built this $54 million mental health facility, and he was out there being proud, excited about what was going on. Tell us the rest of the story, Roger.
Yeah, so, the complex had state-of-the-art Olympic swimming pool, classrooms, computer classrooms, art and craft, centers, and a dormitory that was just incredible. So I'm obviously very proud about this. So towards the end of the tour, cameras are flashing, and I'm, like I said, peacocking around. And I just turned to the medical director, and I happened to say, well, this looks really good. So is everything okay? Is everything good here?
He said, yes, but.
He said, yes, but. He paused. And I said, can I help you with anything? And he paused, and very emphatically he said, we just have one problem. I said, what's that? He said, the children, I'll never forget this. He said, the children, they don't want to go home.
Yep.
And
I got it.
And I turned to him. I said, you said what? No, I didn't say that. My chief of staff, Sania Metzger, said, what did you say? he said, the children, they don't want to go home. And I said, what? And he said, it's good here. They got a swimming pool. They got housing. They got food. They got, all these amenities. They don't want to go home. And I pulled out, and as we were driving out that day, and I looked across the street, there were abandoned houses, and you could see the impact of structural economic inequality and how it impacted on the lives of these children, the dissolution of the family structure because of it, in part because of it.
Right. And
then I started thinking, and I said, and on top of that, you have this entity, and my brain is like spinning now, and I'm thinking, we put all this money in here and the purchasing power and the procurements and all of that. I said, but it's disconnected, from the community, And I went home that night, and I never forgot. So I was talking to my wife, and she's vice president of the 1199, and she said, Roger, it's probably like that with every other damn hospital that we have throughout the borough of Brooklyn, which incidentally were under the threat of closing. And that's why I was in the state legislature, but that thing bugged me, and I kept thinking about it, and then started thinking about what should be the role of the elected officials, not only in the context of institution building, but of ensuring that those institutions are actually being of service to the community. And then, of course, the Interfaith crisis occurred, which is another hospital which was closing. And then I started looking at this from the perspective of this disconnect that these institutions have, where there's no democratic accountability in which the community can draw and define the type of resources that they should actually be providing to the community. And, that's the thing that got to me.
So I take it that's the bridge of why you're here now. That's the bridge of what co-ops are all about.
Yeah, I think so. For me, what I look at is when you look at a political economy, it includes not only the fiscal policies that come from the government, and how they're shaped and formed, but the institutions within certain communities and whether or not those institutions are aligned with a progressive transformation for particularly communities that impact our structural economic inequality. So if you have a hospital that's purchasing toilet tissue and soap and pharmaceuticals and laundry, who's benefiting from that?
Not the people in the neighborhood.
Right. And if it's not the people from the neighborhood, what that really represents is social welfare colonialism. Wait
a minute, you keep throwing these words at me. Social welfare
colonialism. That's my term, that I believe. That if you have an institution that is receiving resources from the command bureaucracy, and that's your money, my money, taxpayer money, and including the money of folks who live in those communities impacted by structural economic inequality.
I got to hold you down a minute because you keep talking, and I got to tell you, I'm with you almost, but I'm going to bring it and make sure that everybody and I really get it. So here's what I have is that people in the community pay taxes. They pay sales taxes, property taxes, income taxes to the government.
And to create programs like Medicare, Medicaid.
The government takes that money and they create those programs, but they also will pay for a hospital.
68%. 68% of all voluntary hospitals. 86% of the revenues for all voluntary hospitals comes from taxpayers.
Okay. So taxpayers are paying those people, that all of this money is coming in, but those hospitals and those institutions, whether it's schools or hospitals or universities or whatever.
That's right.
Are taking their business to people outside the community.
Absolutely.
And so the community doesn't get any benefit of all of that generation of wealth, that moving of the money around.
That's right.
It skips over the community and goes outside.
That's right. In fact, in this particular case, healthcare sector supply chain is valued at $40 billion a year in New York City alone. All right. And in fact, the supply chain for the voluntary hospitals and the public hospitals, all right, the supply chain has been essentially, the contracts, purchase orders have been outsourced mostly to right to work for less states. to states like Alabama, Mississippi, North Carolina that have right to work for less laws. That's right. And
I'm going to tell you, the hospitals in New York
yeah,
buy stuff from the South.
that's right. That's right. That's right.
Okay.
Because the value of a cheap purchase, they value a cheap purchase as opposed to valuing redirecting that supply chain to address the social determinants of health, the toxic triggers of health in poor communities.
And the cheapness is because the folks in the South are paying less money to their workers.
That's exactly right. So this is a vicious cycle that we're contributing to, not only structural economic inequality in central Brooklyn, but also in Mississippi, Alabama, you name it. And the only folks that are profiting from this, again, is handful of people. Some folks say 1% is, but again, I see this as a system of social welfare colonialism.
So I get that the 50% of the bottom half is not getting it.
That's right.
Whoever's getting it.
That's right.
All right.
There you go. That's right.
All right.
Absolutely.
The folks that most need it are not getting the benefits of this $40 billion a year of purchasing by these hospitals in New York.
That's exactly right.
$40 billion.
$40 billion. Toilet tissue, pharmaceuticals, food, laundry. I can go on and on. And that's our tax dollars, So we've got to have a system of democratic accountability that's linked to a system of economic democracy.
So you've gone on. I'm still at $40 billion. I'm sorry.
Okay.
That's 10 zeros, okay?
That's
4
right.
zeros.
That's right.
0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0.
Yeah.
$40 billion of sales.
That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. A lot of purchase orders. That if orchestrated correctly, directed correctly, could create living wages and broad-based profit sharing for folks that then would enhance their health outcomes. Yeah.
So if you take that $40 billion, stop buying it from the South where they're not paying anybody any money, and then put businesses in Brooklyn or in New York where the people in Brooklyn and New York can work there and make a living.
That's right.
Okay? That they can then buy what they need, whether it's food or housing, health care, whatever they might need, good water, then they have better health and the whole community survives. And I would think that the institution would provide.
That's the point. That's the point. You'd have a virtuous circle instead of a vicious circle.
Yes.
And that's the difference. And that's exactly right. Yeah.
Virtual circle instead of a
virtuous circle.
Virtuous.
Yeah. Instead of a vicious circle. So I mean that's the point. Yeah. That's exactly. And it's logical. See, we're on autopilot, with all of this stuff that keeps us despairing, having poor health outcomes. And dying young. Autopilot with anti-democratic processes. We're just on autopilot. We have to stop. We need there's Grace Boggs talks about we're at a turning point, and I think that's what I would like to articulate. We're at a turning point, and we need to think differently, step out of our own ghost, and begin the process of, redefining, how we're going to restructure our community and our democracy. I think that's the key.
Well, we're going to take our second break, and then we're going to come back, and I really want to talk to Roger Green about this turning point and stop our own ghost, and figure out what we can do, and that's why we're here in Cincinnati, and that's why the whole cooperative movement. All right, please don't touch that dial and come back and figure out how we can live longer and live happier. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. This is Vernon and the program is Everything Cooperative. I'm in Cincinnati today with Roger Green from Brooklyn, who we just talked about the problems of health care in America and all of the ills of America in terms of poor health caused by poor housing, poor food, poor jobs, not paying a living wage. It's all there. And so now we want to talk about what he called the turning point. Step out of our own ghost, step out of our own depths. So, Roger, well, first, this is why National Co-op Bank sponsors this program, and we've been sponsoring it, Roger, for 6 years. October was a celebration of our 6th anniversary, been on the show, and we were only geared to be on for 1 month.
Well, congratulations.
But it's taken on, and it's exciting, and I'm loving everything that I've learned, and the kinds of things you've been telling me today is just fascinating. It turns out to be my school, my education piece. And National Co-op Bank is an organization that was started in the mid-'80s to help co-ops and their members by providing financial products, okay, particularly in low-income communities. Mm-hmm. So New York and Brooklyn is ideal for for their charter, their mission-driven bank, okay. So they have been a great partner because not only have they provided financial support, but they've been there with everything and encouragement and pushing. It's been fascinating working with Chuck Snyder and the group at NCB. So now we want to talk about this turning point. How do we stop dying so young? What are you doing?
Well, I think,
Go ahead.
So we did an autopsy, if you will, looking at why there was this disconnect between our hospitals and the local economy, and began to essentially say that we needed a paradigm shift in which we should redirect the supply chain back into the local economy, but not doing it in a traditional way. Looking at unionized worker co-ops as a model that would enable us to provide folks with a living wage and broad-based profit sharing within an enterprise. And also that worker co-ops, if organized correctly, and if they were true expressions of democratic practice with workforce democracy as part of it, also would contribute to the larger crisis that we're facing within our community, in fact, in the nation, which is a crisis in our democracy. We felt that the practice of democracy is important to the long-term democratic project of the United States, and if a worker is living most of his life in an undemocratic enterprise, we think that contributes to the growing alienation that exists within our society. And so the concept basically is let's be democratic, let's have democratized labor, democratized capital, and democratized wealth. And how can we do that? Well, we could start by looking at the models that was started here in Ohio, with the agreement between the Medgar Cooperative Federation and the United Steelworkers. So we met with our good friend Michael Peck, who began to give us greater insight into this whole model of unionized worker co-ops. And we then sat down with members of organized labor, both the 1199 Healthcare Workers Union as well as the New York State Nurses Association, and other leaders in the community. And there was a consensus, and the healthcare administrators, and there was a consensus that this was something that we should pursue. So we then began the process of looking at how do we do this in the context of public policy. So we took 14 elected officials to Mondragon, and with the help of our allies at the MIT CoLab, we took them over to Mondragon to study the Mondragon Cooperative Federation. 7 elected officials from Brooklyn, 7 elected officials from the Bronx, the South Bronx in particular. And the idea was to look at how and whether the Mondragon Cooperative Federation model would be applicable to Central Brooklyn, creating unionized worker co-ops that would be aligned with the healthcare sector supply chain. And so there was a resolution that would make sense, and that we should create economic infrastructure to begin this process. So we've incorporated a company, 501c3, a nonprofit community development corporation called Citizen Share Brooklyn. All right.
Citizen?
Yes, Citizen Share Brooklyn.
Share Brooklyn. Now, okay, that's what I want. You said you want to combine this union worker co-op, and a worker co-op is a business that's owned and controlled by the employees.
That's right.
So you want to create these businesses that's owned and controlled, democratically controlled by the employees.
Yes.
Okay, to get part of that $40 billion.
That's exactly right.
Okay,
there you go.
You keep talking about the supply chain.
That's right.
I think we understand $40 billion. At least we understand money.
That's right.
Okay.
Okay. That's right.
Or the lack of money.
Or the lack of money. Yeah.
So how do we get part of that piece of that pie? Show me the money. Okay.
That's right. Okay. Very, very important. We have a joke we often repeat. Anytime we hit a bump with this, we remember something Milana Ron Karenga once said. He said, a Negro is a capitalist without capital. So this is about. I
want to hit on that. A Negro is a capitalist without capital.
That's right. That's right.
And I just want to, again, growing up in West Virginia.
Yeah.
Anybody. Okay, in our little neighborhoods was black and white. We didn't have any Asians, didn't have any Native Americans. We had one lady from one of the islands, African person from one of the islands. But for most part, they're just poor people.
That's right.
So with anybody that's in that 30% or below the median family income, 50% or below the median family income are capitalists, because I like that motto, that we can pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps.
Right. Yeah.
I like that motto and that idea, but we have no capital to get started.
That's right. And
most part, the capitalists won't loan us money because we have no capital.
That's right. There's nothing wrong with capital. The issue is how capital has been manipulated and polarized. That's one of the problems. And I think what we're saying basically is that we need to democratize labor, democratize capital, and democratize wealth. That's what we think we need to do in order to address the structural economic inequality that causes poor health outcomes within our communities. And so that the thinking, and it was first aspirational, was that, well, perhaps we need to look at worker co-ops, as a model, and there's a history of that in our community, as you know, dating back to, when the Knights of Labor actually allowed African Americans to enter their union, and the Knights of Labor experimented with worker co-ops, the work that Fannie Lou Hamer did, Ella Baker, was actively involved in the formulation of worker co-ops, and Marcus Garvey and Dr. Du Bois. Somebody said one of the few things they agreed on, that they didn't argue about between Du Bois and Garvey was the concept of a worker co-op, because the concept was basically that as we struggled for economic self-reliance, that worker co-ops also created a culture of democratic practice that would be necessary in struggling against other forms of oppression within our community.
Right on.
Yeah.
Now, I just want to get a plug in for Dr. Jessica Gordon-Nimhart.
Oh, that's right.
Who wrote the book Collective Courage, which was my education, my Bible on blacks in co-ops. And all those names plus.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All were Martin Luther King.
That's right.
Rosa Parks. I mean, all of these civil rights leaders believed in this cooperative model, but it's just not taught.
Right.
It's not taught in our communities. It's not taught in our schools.
Exactly.
Okay, and so that's one of the reasons for this radio program, to get this out there.
And I think you hit on one of the most important issues. And in fact, when we took the elected officials to Mondragon and came, we studied, it was very clear that when they started the Mondragon Federation, it started with a school. You start with the mastery of knowledge, skills, and values that are necessary for this type of transformation, this type of economic enterprise. And I think that there's no question that if we're going to be successful in Brooklyn, we're going to need a educational domain or a network of educational domains that prepares this generation to become worker owners and to understand both the knowledge, skills, and values that are needed to become worker owners. And it also means a critique of the current political economy. What's good about it, what's bad about it, what needs to be transformed, and how does a vision of transformation could be aligned with addressing the structural economic inequality in communities that have been marginalized for far too long, like that.
So I was in Baltimore 3 weeks or so ago at the Worker Cooperative, the Eastern Region Worker Cooperative Conference, and I specifically went there to go to this particular workshop on co-ops in schools. In Puerto Rico, for 60 years, through legislation, they've had co-ops in schools. They have 53 co-ops right now, and I know middle and high school, I think in elementary schools, where the students own their own businesses and they learn about business at this early age, and they learn about co-ops.
That's right.
Because I've been wanting to get that in schools. With the fifth principle of co-ops is education, training, and information.
That's right.
Which was probably the second reason I like co-ops, is that it was all about teaching.
Right, right. So,
and I want to get back to Citizen Share Brooklyn, though.
Okay. Yeah. So Citizen Share Brooklyn, we just incorporated. It will be a nonprofit that will provide assistance in building the infrastructure for, as we envision, a network of unionized worker co-ops that would be aligned first with the healthcare sector as anchor institutions, and then also, I hope, we hope that is, that it will be expanded to include other anchor institutions such as the university system and the public school system, by example. So that's Citizen Share Brooklyn, but we will also have a for-profit arm, LLC called Citizen Share Global, that will look at the relationship between these businesses and the global supply chain, because, that is the reality of the type of economy that we live in. Globalization is a reality, or internationalization is a reality, and we need to figure out how our community fits into that, the
supply chain.
That supply chain. That's right.
Going from 40 billion to 40 trillion, maybe.
Hey, I think that's that is a reality. We cannot continue to do these one-off worker co-ops. I think they have to be integrated into a system of a cooperative ecosystem, similar to what they have achieved in Mondragon. Maybe not exactly like it, but similar. There's things that we can learn from the Mondragon model. And then look at it as it relates to the opportunities that exist in institutions, and I want to emphasize this, institutions that are, in fact, sustained by our tax dollars, and that's healthcare, which will grow exponentially. It's the educational system. Again, I guarantee you that the supply chain for the educational system is probably being outsourced as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
Perhaps to those same people.
Maybe.
But we also haven't talked about the jail system and the number of people in jails. And
exactly.
How we can get some co-ops inside the jails so that folks can learn about co-ops. And then when they come out, they not only have a job, but they'll have a community that supports them.
That's exactly right.
In Italy, I think people at 5% recidivist return back to jail. We're here at something like 70-80%.
When we were in Mondragon, that was the third rail. In New York City. Okay.
We're going to come back to that.
Okay.
And we got to get to while we're here in Cincinnati.
Okay.
We'll be right back, everybody. Information is power. This is Vernon Oaks. The program is Everything Cooperative. We're here to give you information about co-ops. We're talking about our economy, the U.S., and how racism has affected people's health, people's lifespan, quality of life. So we give you this information so you can go out and find a co-op and buy from them, or you can decide that you want to create your own. And this is what Roger Green and the folks there that they're working with are creating in Brooklyn and around Brooklyn. And we were talking about Citizens Share Brooklyn before we left off, and we want to get back to that. And, Roger, I'd like for you to talk about why you're here in Cincinnati.
Because we want to learn. We assume that we don't have all the answers. That's one of the reasons we went to Mondragon, and we know that there are local demonstrations of some progressive thinking and progressive practice around worker co-ops.
What's your definition of progressive? What's that mean?
Well, I think, for me, it really means the aligning with an imperative that ensures democratic practice both this is for me, I'm saying, in our politics and in our economic system. That's what I think about progressive. But I also think about it in the context that the outcomes will ensure that they are informed by, that they ensure equity, for all people regardless of race, class, gender, sexual orientation, or national origin. That's where I'm at.
I've got it when I keep hearing about politicians that are progressive or this and that and the other, and it seems like the politicians that they call progressive are trying to put in programs that help people, everyday people.
There you go.
Right, so
that's basic. I like that. I like that. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay, so you're here to learn.
Yeah.
Progressive thoughts, seeing what people are doing to help people.
Yeah.
And so that you can maybe take that knowledge back and apply it in Brooklyn and wherever else you work.
Yeah, and this has been fascinating because we don't have all the answers. This is a journey, and it can be fragile at times, and it's, you can expect that you're going to make mistakes, but, we've got a line of folks depending on us, and so we got to, try to secure as much knowledge as possible from other people who have perhaps made mistakes and learned and can give us advice and counsel.
But with that, I've got that I don't make mistakes and people around me don't. What we do is we are successful or we're learning.
Yeah.
One or the other. Okay.
I always go back to, I think it was Amilcar Cabral, who was, leader of national liberation movements in Southern Africa, and he says, tell no lies, claim no easy victories, and I think that's a very good admonition that we can follow when we're out here trying to engage in these types of struggles. The importance of self criticism and being humble enough to know we don't have all the answers. No. We really don't. And so
it's a learning journey.
So coming to Cincinnati was incredible because I've been to Cleveland. We were there, and Cincinnati and Cleveland are different. And what I found here is a more of a connection to a leadership that is grounded in ordinary people that have been empowered to make changes within their communities. And I think that's very important because, you can create a capitalist corporation or even a worker-owner corporation, and it can still follow some kind of didactic anti-democratic practices. You really can.
Yeah.
And so I think the values component becomes very important for people that have been oppressed and alienated. They need to be empowered to have a sense of self-agency, and I think that's what we found here in Cincinnati. And we need to learn from that and then figure out how to incorporate those values into the work that we're doing in Brooklyn. Now, I hope we can do that.
So I have found that a co-op can be successful if it's following the values and principles of cooperation. The values are self-help. We're helping ourselves. We're not looking for the man to come help us. We're pulling together, helping ourselves.
That's right.
Self-responsibility. You got to have that responsibility in there.
That's right.
And there's the offshoot of that is accountability, democracy, equality, equity, and solidarity.
There you go. That's right.
We're working together.
That's right.
In the ethical principles of the founders of co-ops, or the ethical principles of Africa, is is honesty, openness, social responsibility, and caring for one another.
That's right. Yeah.
So caring for one another.
That's right. That's right. And I think that this stuff is so important because sometimes, you can get caught up into this kind of very technical, dot the I's, cross the T's formulation in terms of developing enterprises and even organizing within the community. But I think if it's absent values, humane values, I think we're not going to be successful in the long run. We go back to this whole concept of despairing death. How you get at that is in empowering folks with a sense of self-agency that's connected to other people within their community, building community. Dr. King called it the beloved community,
right.
And I think that's what we're talking about,
Volunteer and open membership is the first principle, open to everybody. Democratic member control, we've been talking a lot about that, about the principles of co-ops. Member economic participation, put a little money in. If there's profit, let the members decide how that's going out, and sometimes there's a dividend. Autonomy and independence, they have to have control. And fifth one, we've already talked about education, training, information, cooperation among cooperatives, and this is why at programs like here in Cincinnati, I find that and everywhere I go, whether it's housing co-ops or credit unions, is this really sharing of data.
That's right.
Don't hold on to it like,
right.
If I tell you how I'm successful, then you're going to somehow do something to me.
Right.
It's competitive.
Right.
Capitalist model.
Right.
And then concern for a community. It's built into the DNA.
That's right.
Okay, making sure that we give back. And that's why when there's a profit or surplus, I've heard that co-ops, 3 areas they can do it. They can keep some for growth of the business, give away some for social responsibility and helping for the community that they're in, and or giving back a dividend to the members.
And these values are so critical. And that's why I go back to, you were talking about the educational domains that are needed to advance this. My background, I'm a former teacher, so I always consider myself an educator.
What do you teach?
I taught history, social studies.
All right, I was science and math.
Okay. We complement each other there. Okay. So I mean, for me, I think that, and it was reinforced when I went to Spain and viewed the Mondragon model. We're not going to be successful if we don't have strong educational institutions the appropriate epistemology and pedagogy to advance the knowledge, skills, and values needed, for worker co-ops, and placing that in the context of a movement for economic democracy, to build economic democracy that would be parallel to political democracy within the United States. That's what I think, And so I think the educational system becomes very critical. In Brooklyn, what we're doing is we've identified some schools that where the principals have agreed for us to come in and to integrate courses around career technology education with the study of worker co-ops, how to become a worker owner. And so we're doing that we would begin doing that at a school in Brooklyn called Boys and Girls High School, and another learning center called the STEAM Center, which is located in the Navy Yard. Yeah.
Well, I was just at a conference, a worker cooperative conference in Baltimore, and they talked about in Puerto Rico, they have had co-ops in schools for 60 years.
Wow.
And they've created the models and so forth. They have 53 co-ops right now in schools in Puerto Rico. So I'd like to hook you up with the people that was in there so you can learn from their model.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. I would love to.
There's a huge Puerto Rican population in New York.
That's right.
Matter of fact, I taught at City University one year out in Jamaica, York College.
York College, okay.
I taught math out there.
Oh, wow.
And out there, what I noticed out there, and I was a little bit younger then, out there was a fight between the blacks and the Puerto Ricanians for the crumbs off the table.
Yeah.
Then I taught at San Diego State, and there was a fight out there between the Mexican Americans and the blacks about the crumbs on the table. And for both cases, I'm going, why don't we just come together? We ain't got much.
That's right.
And we're not getting very much. So why don't we come together? And this co-op model helps us to come together.
Yeah, absolutely. No question about it. Yeah.
In our last 2 minutes, do you like what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. You know, folks talk about your raison d'etre, your reason for being, you know. And, you know, mine has always been about, you know, education, children, families, and how we create a, you know, a better life, you know, for folks in our community, you know. And I'm no different than anybody else, you know. I've just been blessed, given the opportunity that I can express it, you know. And I think those of us who are given these opportunities, we got to do the work, because a lot of folks would like to do what we're doing, but they can't, you know, stuck in these jobs that are, you know, in conditions that are anti-democratic and oppressive, that they're not contributing to the larger community. So if we, you know, given an opportunity, and I've been given many, you know, I served in state legislature for 25 years, and then came out of that, and I'm still healthy, and I'm able to do a little something, you know, why not? I think for me, at this point in time, and I know my colleagues would say this also, you know, with the work that we're doing now is seed corn, because we have to have an intentionality to transition this on to the, you know, future generations. Right. Yeah, we got to that, and that's really why I'm doing this now. You know, one of my colleagues, Maurice Reed, and he's an incredible leader. We call him Job. You know, he's got the patience of Job. You know, he's the one that's, you know, inspiring us to move forward. Yeah.
Thank you very much, buddy. You've taught me a lot today. Everybody out there, thank you for listening. Hope you could be with us down here in Cincinnati, and please live this week cooperatively.